If I had to pick the number one reason that people reach out and find me through podcasts or the videos, it is the dead bedroom. It is the sexless marriage. Welcome back to the Secure Husband Podcast. Bruce Abbott, certified professional coach and founder of SecureHusband.com. This month, we're starting a new podcast series on sexless marriage. This, again, is probably the number one reason that people reach out and find my material, because this is probably one of the most painful areas that men have to deal with in a dysfunctional relationship. I want to start by saying something about the sexless marriage, and that is everything that I talk about this month applies to probably 80% to 90% of all the men that I work with, myself included. This is not going to cover every single situation. There are men in flat-out toxic relationships. There are men in narcissistic relationships. There are men whose circumstances are some sort of an outlier. But what I'm going to talk about this month covers the majority of situations in men who are anxious, preoccupied, or maybe anxious, leaning, fearful avoidance, who are with dismissive, avoidant wives, or wives who, for whatever reason, have put up guards and walls around the bedroom. The thing about the sexless marriage is there's a misconception. Now, I get it. There is a subset of men that are all about the player, the game. I am talking about good men married to good women. The men that I work with are in their 40s, their 50s. These are, again, family men, providers in their home, career men. These are not men out there chasing sex for sex sake. This is about connection. This is more than just sex. And I think there's a misconception about that. Oh, guys it's all about sex. Men are all about sex. No, it's not, because sex is how men feel connected to their wife. Otherwise, you're just roommates. Because I do have a female population that listens to this material that I put out, and I get feedback from them all the time. And that is one of the things that I think, again, gets misunderstood. They just think, well, it's a physical release. They just think it's the man he wants to get off, whatever. No, that's how men connect. When it comes to this idea of a dead bedroom, a sexless marriage, there are lots of things out on the internet of what the definition of a sexless marriage is, and people disagree on it's a certain number of times per month or times per year. I'm not going to focus so much on the quantitative. This is not as much of a numbers thing as it is a quality thing. I think that there are certain marriages that really could be considered a dead bedroom, even though there actually is sex taking place. What do I mean by that? I'll talk about this later in the series. That's things like duty sex, pity sex, where it still is one-sided. Again, that's for a future episode. Let's look at this concept of a sexless marriage. And I don't know what the number is. The last time I looked, it was 10 times per year or something along those lines, 1 time per month. I don't want to get hung up on the numbers because that's not the important part. What I want to start talking about to launch this series is, a sexless marriage, it's not just the lack of sex, but for men in this situation, it's what we made it mean. It's what we made sex mean for us. If you've ever had these thoughts, she doesn't love me anymore, she's not attracted to me at all, she doesn't desire me at all. Those are narratives that we start telling ourselves as the situation progresses. And the thing about a sexless marriage, unless there was some very specific rupture that happened, infidelity, or just something that really destroys emotional trust and safety, a sexless marriage is something that happened over time. And, we tell ourselves these narratives that she's not attracted to me, she doesn't desire me. And I know for anxious, preoccupied men, that will cause them to try harder. For fearful, avoidant men who lean anxious, they're going to vacillate back and forth between, I'm going to try harder, and then when she rejects me, fine, I'm going to hit the gym, get myself fit, and find me another woman. These are all stories that we tell ourselves. And these feel real to us, these thoughts, because they're based off of, again, anxiety, insecurity. For us, this is the truth. I do not feel like she loves me. I'm just a roommate now. I do not feel like she's attracted to me. I'm going to tell you something. What your brain is telling you is not always the truth. And if you don't understand that, you are going to react to your marriage in a way that makes things worse. And you're going to play the victim role. One of the things I'm going to talk about in this month-long series is you are not as powerless in these situations as you think you are. But before we can get to that point, I have to address the narrative that's going on. The stories that you're telling yourself in a sexless marriage. And because you believe it, they feel real. But they will destroy any connection or attraction or chance of things turning around. What does this look like? Well, if you're in this situation, what a sexless marriage feels like. You know what it feels like to be in bed with your wife and you reach over and she turns away, she rolls over. You try to initiate and she rejects. I'm tired. My head hurts. You know that feeling. And you know what happens when you try to flirt and nothing happens, or you reach out to her and she just feels tense and distant. You know that feeling. Something happens inside of you. You feel rejected, disappointed, frustrated. For me, it was that tightness in my chest. Like somebody took and just punched me right in the chest. When that happens, and if you go back to our podcast series on the nervous system, we get a trigger and it creates a feeling. Unless you can process that feeling, that tightness in your chest, you could pass it through. What's going to happen is all of a sudden it's going to attach itself to the narrative that's already in your brain. And then from there, you're off to the races and your mind will fill in the blanks. And this is where these thoughts of she does not want me, she's not attracted to me, she's completely checked out. If there's any kind of insecurities or jealousy or anything going on, this is now where you start thinking there must be somebody else. The idea here is I'm not enough. She does not want me. That's where your brain instantly goes to. So in that moment, when your mind all of a sudden takes that trigger, it reacts to the physical sensation, it starts filling in the blanks, and now the story gets fed into even more. The nervous system is not geared to do what is best for your relationship. It is doing what it thinks needs to protect you and keep you safe. That's not always one and the same. What it's doing to protect you is not always what is going to be best for your marriage. And that's why I always talk about sitting in the discomfort. When you get triggered, your brain is not trying to tell you the truth and be open-minded in this situation. It's putting up the guard. Because your brain, remember, it hates uncertainty. It hates not knowing. It hates emotional pain that doesn't have a clear explanation, a clear reason. So what it does is it creates a story that feels like the truth. Because that truth, and I probably should put truth in quotes, that answer even though it's a painful one, tries to bring some sense to the situation as opposed to just being confused. And then if you have any history of rejection or feeling unchosen or not good enough, feeling unseen, then your brain is going to keep that file in the old mental storage file cabinet that it has up there. It's going to pull it back up and say, oh, yep, I know what this is. Yeah, it's because you're being rejected again. You're not enough. You're not desirable. You're not attractive enough. So now you're not just dealing with what happened right there in the bed at that moment. You're dealing with years, sometimes decades of emotional wiring that come flooding right back. That's why the reaction to this feels so intense. That's why your nervous system just goes on hyper alert mode. This is also why it feels like more than just sex, because it is more than just sex. I know in my own story, before I went down the healing journey, my brain told me all kinds of things. See, I knew that I was a good husband. I knew I was a good man. I knew I was a solid guy. I did not cheat on my wife ever. I was a very present parent, a family man, loved my kids, loved my wife, good career, all of these things. But I would have this false narrative that went through my head because my wife is dismissive, avoidant, and I am this very anxious, leaning, fearful avoidant. So what happened was I had these expectations in my mind that when reality didn't quite meet that expectation, instead of approaching it from a completely different place, which we will talk about later on in this month in this series, I approached it from the exact same explanation that I just gave you. She doesn't desire me. She doesn't think I'm attracted. I know she's not attracted to me anymore. And so I would react to that, and my reactions became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And from there, the marriage really struggled in the bedroom. It wasn't like, I wonder if she's not attracted to me, or I think maybe. No, I knew it. I knew without a doubt she's not attractive to me anymore. Because if she was, she would treat me the same way and be all over me the same way she did when we were dating and in our 20s and early married. If you are in that situation, this is where you have to actually stop and ask yourself, how do you know this for sure? How do you know she's not attracted to you anymore? In my situation, what I later learned is it had absolutely nothing to do with attraction. My wife was still physically attracted to me. Because part of what I did was, I need to go to the gym. I started dressing better and dressing nicer and getting fit, and I lost weight and gained muscle mass and all of this stuff, and nothing changed the situation. It was because it had nothing to do with that. And that's the point that I also want to hammer home in this podcast series. This is more than just physical attraction. So when you get to that point, you have to ask yourself, how do I know that this is true? Now, if you're like me, I was like, well, she never initiates. She doesn't respond when I do try, and she's always tired, and she's got a headache, and all of these things. And so I was able to come back and say, okay, that is true. That's what she does. That's her actions. That's what I see. That's what happens. But how do I know what it means? That is the question that if I had just asked myself sooner, would have saved me a lot of internal pain. How do I know that what I'm seeing means that? Now, I do talk a lot about radical acceptance, but in this particular situation, you're starting to assign meaning early. As you get down the road, radical acceptance, yes, that comes into your marriage. But at this stage, you're starting to realize something that if you stop and just ask yourself this question, how do I know what it really means? Then maybe for the first time, you can realize you're not necessarily reacting specifically to what was happening at that moment, but you're reacting to what you have decided that it meant. That may seem like I'm splitting hairs, but what I'm saying here is what your narrative about what is happening, real and true. Because there is a difference many times between what happened and what you made it mean. So if she said no, or she turned away, or she didn't respond, yes, that's a fact. It's real, it's observable, you see this. Then the meaning that floods up of she doesn't love me, she's not attracted to me, that part, that story, if you don't separate the two, you will continue to react to the story as if it's reality. Now, again, you may have ruptures, you may have behaviors that have triggered her, because that story may be her reaction to the rupture, not your physical attractiveness. Do you see, we go back to the earlier podcasts about emotional safety, emotional trust. There's a big difference between did you do something to harm emotional trust over she's not attracted to me, she doesn't desire me. So you have to look at this and tell yourself the story I'm telling myself may not be the whole story. It may not be reality. It may not be the truth. Because when you tell that story, that false narrative, the story changes your behavior. And once you believe the story and you start acting from it, when you start believing that she's not attracted to me, if you are an anxious, preoccupied husband, that's where you're going to start overdoing it. You're going to start trying harder and seeking validation and over pursuing the chase, which I've talked about how if your wife is dismissive avoidant, that's going to repel her, not attract her. And if you're an anxious, leaning, fearful avoidant, you may do some of that where you're trying harder, and then something triggers you, then you shut down, you withdraw, you sulk, you emotionally pull away. That was my MO as a fearful avoidant who leans anxious. Hot and cold, in and out, try hard, something would happen, pull away, and I would build resentment. All of that behavior is not coming from the truth, because the truth is somewhere in between all of this, but it's coming from that narrative. It's coming from that story. The irony of all of this, and this is what I struggled with for so long, the behavior that comes from the story creates the exact outcome that I was so afraid of. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I could not control it, at least at that time. I was taking something that may not have been the truth, reacting from it, causing it to become maybe closer to the truth. Do you see the loop that you get stuck in? And I see this all the time with guys that I work with. If you go to the Reddit subforums on dead bedroom and sexless marriage, you see this over and over and over. It's the loop that keeps you stuck. You feel rejected. You tell yourself a story. The story creates that emotional pain. The pain drives the behavior. Then that behavior creates more disconnection, which reinforces the story. And now you're stuck. And out of all of this, it's not necessarily because of what she's doing. You say that, you think that, because that's what you're seeing. But the bigger deal of all of this is being made in your mind and how you're interpreting it. Because I can tell you from my own experience, from men that I work with, when you change this and you break the cycle, then what happens is the false narrative starts not necessarily aligning as much with what you start to see. So, for example, when you stop behaving from this false narrative, and over time, emotional trust and safety returns to the marriage, guess what happens? Some of those areas where you felt rejected, maybe they disappear a little bit more. Maybe there is some initiation happening again. Maybe she is receptive to when you initiate. It's not going to happen if you're stuck in the loop. And I can see the comments that are going to happen right now. And because, again, I talked about outliers, there is going to be 10, 20% that maybe this doesn't necessarily apply to, and there's other factors involved. I get it. But what I'm saying is this is the majority. Okay, what if her lack of desire is not about your attractiveness? What if it's about pressure? What if it's about emotional disconnection? What if it's about stress or kids or hormones or just life in general? What if it's about her own childhood wounds? What if it's about her internal protection? You really don't know. But when you assume that you know, you start closing off healthy possibilities. So let's look at this from a secure husband process. The first step is awareness. If you've listened to this podcast, Annie, you know, hey, look, I can't fix my wife. I don't have to fix everything in my marriage like right now. I don't have to solve every problem, but I am going to start noticing what I am telling myself in these moments. When she turns away, when sex feels one-sided. And I've done several podcast episodes on this. I want you to think about this one specific area today of what story am I telling myself when she doesn't respond? What meaning am I assigning? That's all I'm looking at today. What is the narrative that's going on in my head? And you get curious, that sense of awareness. Just notice, just pause, take a deep breath. Ask yourself that question. What am I telling myself that this means? Question it. Don't automatically assume. Don't just go straight to that narrative. In my situation, and in several of the guys that I work with, once you see that, then you can start to make changes. So when you stop saying, she's not attracted to me, and you start saying, I'm not sure what's going on yet, that right there, that one change can lower your anxiety, reduce the chasing and the pressure. You see, it changes your energy. You actually become calmer because you're not automatically going right to this negative thing. You're just stopping at the curious part. What does this mean? Again, we're not fixing the dead bedroom at this very moment. This is baby steps right here. So step one, you just notice, you become calmer, more grounded because you're less reactive, and you just get curious. That'll change that energy. That'll reduce that pressure. And when you practice this over time, what's going to happen is you stop reacting. And again, in many of these situations, it's our reactions and our behaviors that fuel the dead bedroom. Insecurities coming out. That's why I say, is this a guarantee that it'll save your marriage? No. But what I have seen more often than not is when these types of improvements happen, something very interesting happens. She will start to soften because she doesn't feel like she has to put guards up, because that's her childhood wounds. That's the dismissive avoidant. She starts to lower the guards. Again, this takes time. You're not going to do this overnight, but slowly the pressure is less. It's because you stopped letting the story in your head control everything. Just remember, just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. It feels real, but it doesn't mean that it's accurate. Because remember, your thoughts, they're influenced by those childhood wounds, your fears, your need for certainty, your past. If you don't become aware of that, you're going to keep reacting in ways that push your marriage further away. So before you can do anything in your relationship to solve the sexless marriage, the dead bedroom, you have to get really clear with your own thoughts and how they're driving everything, how they're not always telling you the truth. When you can start to do that, that gives you that first step, and we'll talk more about this as the month goes along, of being able to solve the dead bedroom. Because I get it. I know how painful the sexless marriage is. I get it. I've been there. I've clawed my way out of it. I'm working with men all the time. I know how easy it is to go down this road, to tell yourself, she doesn't want me. She doesn't love me. She's not attracted to me. And to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. because she can sense that idea of, well, maybe I'll go find it somewhere else. Maybe I'll get fit and somebody else will come and see me as attractive and want to touch me. She reads that. But when you do that, again, you're inconsistent. There's no emotional trust. There's no emotional safety. And so then when you react from those thoughts, then again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't know exactly what's going on. You think you do. You assume you do. And then you react as if you do. But it's almost always going to guarantee the outcome that you are afraid of. For this week, I want you to do one thing. If you are in a dead bedroom, a sexless marriage, just notice the story you're telling yourself. Don't worry about anything else. Just catch it. Name it. Ask yourself, is this story actually true? Or is this what my wounds are feeding? Is this what my mind is telling me right now based on those childhood wounds? If you want to come out of a dead bedroom, out of a sexless marriage, then that's where you have to start. You have to start with taking your thoughts, taking the power back over your mind. And then that's the first step to changing the dynamic. I get this. This was such a painful time in my marriage. And so I get it. If you are in this right now and you are hurting, let me tell you, none of this is meant to shame, blame, or guilt you. I am giving you this from my heart and all the love that I can send to you, man, because I get it. And I want to tell you from a sense of compassion that you don't have to stay in this situation, because you actually have more power and control over a dead bedroom and a sexless marriage than you think you do. And that's actually going to be our next episode, is you're not powerless. You think you are, but it's the victim mentality, and it's being driven by your thoughts. I hope that you join me for the next episode. I hope that you get something out of this month-long podcast series. If you're catching this podcast because you were searching dead bedroom or sexless marriage and you came across this podcast for the first time, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button. If this marriage is struggling for you and you're like, wow, I get this, or I know somebody who's going through this, share this episode. And if you're a regular listener to this podcast, would you take 2 minutes and go give me a review? That helps the algorithm. It helps men find this for their own healing. And if you're struggling with a dead bedroom, if the sexless marriage has you feeling stuck, I encourage you, visit securehusband.com. Fill out that free 30-minute consultation, just a conversation to see if one-on-one coaching might be right for you. And I'll see you on the next Secure Husband podcast. Thanks for listening.